Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. We are kicking off a brand new month that we've dedicated to public safety, and Viasat is this month's sponsor. We've got two incredible folks from the company with us here today, Kristen Mineck and Jerry Hancock. Welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, thanks.
I appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
We're so excited to have you because, as you think about public safety and command and control and all the missions they do, your mission to support them is so important, and especially with everything going on in the country and in the world. So excited to dive into it. But before we do, if we could maybe get a little bit of background about yourselves first. So, Kristen, I'm going to go with you. If you can give us a little bit about, that 30-second elevator bio pitch, if you will, about, kind of what you bring to the table.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So I've been with Viasat, formerly Inmarsat, for about 10 years now. Time really does fly. My current role, my title is kind of a mouthful, Manager of Aviation Standards and Requirements. What that really means is I look after and I track the development of international regulations, standards, guidance, anything and everything related to, how are we going to integrate all these new, really exciting vehicles and use cases into our existing air traffic control systems without undue burden on anybody and without causing any safety risk for anyone. In a former life, I worked with the FAA in various different offices under AJI, which is the Air Traffic Safety Organization, as well as ABS, the Aviation Safety Organization. And right before I left federal service to come work for Viasat, I was in the office that writes the Safety Management System, or SMS, for the global one. There's two, not the air traffic SMS, which gets confusing. But that office also looked after search and rescue operations from the FAA side. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and very, very glad to be here today to talk about it.
Okay, awesome. Well, your background and of course, regulatory compliance and regulations is hard as an attorney, so we can nerd out together. But Jerry, you also have a very deep background in aviation safety and working for the FAA. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Let's see. I've been with Viasat not quite as long with as Kristen. I think we both started, in the DC office under Inmarsat, but I think it's probably been about 8 years for me. I think you've got about maybe a year or two on me. But my focus is really on developing aviation solutions and overlaying, cybersecurity on top of that as well. So I spend my time working not just internally with our own organization, but a lot of time working externally with the different aircraft manufacturers, regulatory groups, and ICAO and things like that. So that it keeps me pretty busy in trying to make sure that the solutions that we have can integrate well within the vehicles themselves, with the ground systems especially, and then being able to make sure that end-to-end wise we participate and do that in a way that makes sense.
Awesome. I mean, so much overlap between what you do. You can't really talk about aviation safety without talking about cybersecurity and vice versa. But for those, you mentioned Inmarsat, and of course we're here talking about Viasat, and folks may not understand kind of like the history of the company and really that kind of high level overview of the very, very long history in aviation that Inmarsat and also I believe maritime command and control in terms of kind of where you guys sit today. Can one of you walk us through a little bit about the company?
Sure. I can start off. Really, Inmarsat started out as actually a government entity within the UK focused on maritime safety. It rolled into aviation safety. And today, although Viasat has acquired Inmarsat, we still have our our international headquarters is still in London, which is where it's been for a while. Our U.S. headquarters is out of Carlsbad, which is the original Viasat headquarters. But we have the L-band spectrum, and L-band is the safety spectrum that's used both for maritime and for aviation. I think probably the biggest thing that people, when they think of satellite, because Viasat is Viasat, it's like, well, it's just satellite.
Right.
You've got Inmarsat, it's just satellite. I think it's important for people to understand that, just because I'm using the term satellite, that doesn't mean all satellites should create an equal. It's like saying all cars are equal, right? So
Right.
from a spectrum perspective, it's important to understand that one of the reasons that Viasat acquired Inmarsat was because of its L-band spectrum, right? So it's a safety spectrum that's there. And what's unique about the L-band spectrum is, if anybody's, ever been in Florida in the afternoon, especially between 3 and 5, think of DirecTV. DirecTV is a K-band level satellite. And usually when the storms come in, they're pretty heavy. You lose your TV, right?
Yeah.
Can't have that for safety services. Safety services, especially if you think about it in maritime, when there's an emergency, there's usually storms and everything else going on. They want a signal that's going to work. And that's where the L-band spectrum comes into play, is it doesn't get impacted by those types of things. So that's that was the original origins of Inmarsat and what it was doing. Its focus was on the GEO type satellite environment, focused on L-band and delivering the safety services. And so that's kind of what its original origins were. And then it just grew from there, right? So we have not just L-band, we have K-band satellite spectrums, and we're continuing to grow that to be both GEO and LEO.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Kristen, do you want to elaborate at all?
Yeah, I guess I'd just add on, because of this L-band heritage, Inmarsat has, we've been integrated all over the world with existing air traffic control systems. So, in the traditional commercial aviation safety world, it's a very well-known name. Not so much in advanced air mobility and drones, this is a new market for everybody. But what Viasat believes that we can do very, very well and play a niche role in this market is to translate all of that heritage, connecting traditional commercial aviation, providing coverage in areas that others can't reach, and just making smaller, lighter, cheaper terminals that are appropriate for these new vehicles, and having that always on, always available spectrum for the most mission critical and remote areas. So hopefully that's a bit of a connection and a translation between the heritage and what we're trying to do today and what we're talking about here today.
No, actually that's perfect. And, I remember, Jerry, you and I met, gosh, it was like a couple years ago at Commercial UAV when Viasat had its first booth there. And I remember why are they here? Right. And then we started talking and it all came together. And as, we all sit here watching, not only the drone industry, but advanced air mobility. We're going to talk about all of this, of course, further momentarily. As we're watching these industries mature and become true, like real aviation, right? Not just like hobbies or just for fun, but like mission critical, beyond visual line of sight, all different kinds of markets. We're seeing the FAA restructuring, elevating drones. On the same plane as general aviation most recently. All of these changes are happening now, and you guys are really, I think, perfectly postured to tell this story now, especially of all times, with the heritage that you bring to the table. So, because also a picture paints 1,000 words, I know we've got a great video to roll that kind of summarizes a little bit about the company. So let's go ahead and roll film.
Okay. I'm Tony Spencer. I work for Viasat. We wish to bring all of the prerequisites from our commercial air transport safety solutions into this uncrewed category.
The brief was given to us was very clear. Go after the lowest size, the lowest weight, the lowest power, and the lowest cost terminal you can get, and try and disrupt the market. Today we're working with one of our new partners, Aero Solutions, who are a drone development company. They've developed a test platform that allows companies such as us, a technology provider, to put our products through their paces.
We strongly believe that the uncrewed platforms and market for platforms doing air taxis, delivery, cargo, flying at altitude will need to be safely integrated into commercial airspace. And we bring that network, that solution. However, this solution lends itself to many, many use cases, including inspection surveillance, anywhere where remote communications or communications at altitude are required. The assured communication link through weather and the physics of the L-band network allow us to provide reliable, assured connectivity for emergency solutions, as well as working with our Autonomy and partners and people like Viasat. We can actually do a decent quality of video through the same link whilst maintaining command and control.
My name is Stuart McCone. I'm CEO of Viasat Global. We've got a bunch of new technology that we're showing, new features on the software, partnership with Autonomy, running on the Viasat L-band satellite terminals, delivering real-time video solutions to autonomous platforms.
We've achieved this with market feedback. Compared to some of our competitors, we have a higher data rate, up to 200 kilobit per second.
We will demonstrate BVLOS flight, beyond visual line of sight flight, with robust communication in preparation for this to scale globally in the uncrewed market.
What a great video. And I think that's a great segue, Jerry, to ask you, just looking out now, why do you think drones matter so much for public safety missions today, even just compared to a few years ago?
Whether it's for law enforcement, whether it's for search and rescue, whether it's for like a lot of the first responder stuff, drones are more adaptable, more flexible because you can throw them up, you can get them out and get them out quickly to be able to get to a specific target site in a very short time period and really deliver small payloads of things that are there. And so when we look at that from a drone perspective, kind of the way things are today from a public safety. And, I spend a lot of my time with Civil Air Patrol. So that's also very important to me, as well as we incorporate that into our future missions, right? Is it becomes very key, right? I think the struggle today, as we start to do this is, beyond visual line of sight is kind of where things start to get a little bit sketchy. They're doing it kind of line of sight today. So as we start to do this, as this industry starts to evolve, this is where we can overlay a lot of the satellite stuff of what we're doing and being able to equip, just like you saw in that video, small drones with satellite to be able to extend out their range and their payload of where they need to go. And so, that just increases things from search and rescue for, car accidents where ambulance gets stuck, or, just, simple transfer within the cities. Like if you look at different cities within the US or even in Europe, they're transferring blood between hospitals or different medical supplies between different areas. And so it works out really well. And being able to do that, it creates another tool in our public safety toolbox of being able to do this and be able to operate it a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristen, I want to go to you because, as you think about beyond visual line of sight, all the things Jerry mentioned in terms of some of the environments and the challenges, but we also heard you guys talk a little bit earlier about operating over water, the kind of unique weather issues that might creep into a mission and all of these things. Can you explain how Viasat really enables some of these public safety missions, especially in these challenging environments, whether it's search and rescue and a forest canopy and all of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the quickest example that comes to mind when I try to explain this is, even today, when we're bombarded all the time by signals all around us, I still lose cell service sometimes, and I live, downtown DC. So, your terrestrial connections. And then when you take this to more remote areas, the fact of the matter is sometimes they get spotty. Sometimes they don't provide enough coverage. So when you're running a mission that's, in a mountainous area, when it's in the dense canopy, or as you said, in an oceanic area, heaven forbid you lost control of your sailboat and you're caught up in a tide and you're way off course. So that the agencies that are doing search and rescue missions, going out looking for people, they don't want to have to worry about whether or not they're going to have coverage. So what we believe we bring to this equation is a backup layer of connectivity that's always there, so that the responders can focus on whatever their mission is. They don't have to worry about, am I going to lose my coverage? What's going to happen to my drone if I do? And just stay focused on their mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jerry, I want to go back to you. This idea of weak terrestrial connections. I agree with Kristen. We see it all the time. I mean, sure. You don't have to be out in the middle of the Andes, right, for like your cell phone not to work. You could literally, or GPS as an example. You could be in the middle of Denver, which I was just earlier, more recently, and just because of the buildings themselves, it blocks, some of those signals. How does Viasat kind of fill some of those gaps?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting is, like anything else, you're limited to your infrastructure, right? And not only you're limited to your infrastructure, but you got to look at, your landscape, whether, we call it cityscapes. So if you're flying through the city, you may not have mountains, but you certainly have big buildings, right? You may not have, infrastructure deployed to these different areas and stuff like that. So, where there is available line of sight not being to, a ground-based tower, but to the sky, to where the satellite is, then generally you're going to have signal for what we're doing. And so, today, what I call, the emerging drone market started out with an LTE ground-based solution because that's really all that was available. Plus, their size and their power really limited their ability to support having, a SATCOM terminal on there. Even though we've been very good and efficient at reducing the size and the power requirements of our terminals, obviously it's still a technology we're limited by stuff that we have there. So being able to free these drones for those that can handle the size, weight, and power of the terminals, they're now no longer limited by, the ground-based infrastructure where they can be so far from a cell tower. It really comes down to managing your flight paths so that you have line of sight. So whether that's managing your flight path through a city, managing your flight path as you're inspecting railroad systems, or even offshore, right? We spend a lot of time offshore. Either they're inspecting wind tunnels, or not wind tunnels, but windmills, different types of offshore infrastructure, oil rigs, search and rescue, right? Is you're not tied to the ground infrastructure or the distance limitation of the technology that's being used. You've got a more free flow stuff. So the best way in aviation terms, if I put this in aviation terms, the best way to think about it is historically they had what they call a VOR system, right? VORs is planes would navigate based on these, sensors that were deployed globally across the world, but they were limited to what was the ground-based system. So your flight paths were limited to just that. Now it's more of a free flight scenario because you've got space-based navigation, right? That allows you to not depend on the ground-based infrastructure. You've got a more direct route to where you can go. So it creates efficiencies across the board and longer durations of flights.
Yeah, you think about layers of safety, right? Just like when you think in the counter UAS world of kind of layers of defense, like there's not really one, be all and end all solution for any of these things. But when you start stacking them and you have these kind of fail safes and redundancies, that's what I think ups the game when it comes to safety. So, Chris, to go back to you, like public safety agencies, sometimes they don't even know what they don't know what they don't know. In other words, they don't even know what they need, right? Like, so when someone from a public safety agency comes to you or comes to Viasat, what are they looking to do, first of all? And then I guess the flip side of that coin is, what then can you educate them more about what beyond what they've asked for that they could actually do using your products and services?
Yeah. So, oh God, this is such an interesting question. This new industry is so fascinating. You see so many new use cases and so many new vehicles, and it's bringing in, especially with the levels of autonomy, it's bringing in a lot of new players to this space who are blown away by how complex the aviation safety regulatory world really is. That it really does take an expert to help you navigate all of the different layers of it. So, and this is particularly true, I think, for the public safety agencies when they come to us, because they just expect us to be able to hand them a solution that works and they can just go out and fly. And of course, there's a couple more tick boxes that you have to go through with FAA and others before that can happen. So what we're trying very hard to do is provide a simpler solution for these agencies, because they don't want to know how our network works. They don't want to know what we're doing behind the scenes. They just want to know they're going to have an assured, reliable command and control data flow so that they can focus only on whatever their mission is. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to still be done on both sides, but we're getting there. We're getting closer.
Yeah, excellent. And Jerry, I think that also ties into the L-band. I mean, you mentioned it. You talked about how it's a very specific safety spectrum. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because look, most of us aren't the spectrum experts. And to Kristen's point, I think a lot of public safety agencies, right? Some of them don't have aviation departments. Some do. Many are, they buy drones to use them as a tool primarily for, incident awareness and assessment, things like this. So when it comes to L-band, like, explain how that just kind of ups the game for these agencies.
Yeah, sure. That's great. Think about it. If you're a manufacturer, what you're worried about is, how do I get my aircraft out there? How do I get my services up and running? And the operator just wants to know, it's like, look, I want to get my operations up and going. They really don't care about the sausage making. They just like,
they don't have time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, look, don't tell me how the hot dog's made. Just give me a hot dog. Right.
Yeah.
And if it, however it works. What's interesting for these guys here is really what it comes down to is the fact that Viasat's been doing this, Viasat, Emerson, whatever you want to call it. We've been doing this for years, right? And the aviation regulators know our systems. They know that they're aviation grade being the aspect that it's got a proven history in all weather types, in all types of operations from an aviation perspective. So when if you talk to regulators today, most regulators will tell you, especially if you get into BVLOS operations, is they're not comfortable with just an LTE solution, or in fact, some of them are pretty hard pressed to say that they're not comfortable with LTE at all, because of the technology in its current state. Is, as you pointed out yourself, you've lost your cell phone signal in downtown, Denver, or Kristen, in downtown DC. Those things happen, but that infrastructure was built with a certain mindset and a certain level of performance and achievement. With L-band and the safety spectrum, knowing that we're supporting emergency services, whether it's maritime, whether it's aviation, the industry knows us for that. And so they're very comfortable from a regulatory perspective, because they've got the data points and the history that shows that technology is proven in these environments. And so that's what we bring to the table for these, BVLOS operations, is a known, proven communication solution that the regulators are already familiar with. And now it's just a matter of, how is that operator applying these technology solutions to their operations environment, and will that meet their safety case? And if we do this correctly, it will be, as Kristen pointed out, it's an always-on solution that's available to them, that regardless of the types of flight operations they're in, they should have a solution that works for them. That should get them through the safety cases for the regulators. And, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of activity over the past couple of weeks with Reliable and Archer all pushing, the aviation regulators to, hey, help us move this forward to a normal set of operations. We want to get this way. We're not asking for things to be cheaper. We're not asking for, compromise safety, but we want to do this in a way that allows us to push things forward in a normalized way. And so that's what we're trying to help these organizations achieve.
Awesome. We're going to get the part 108 here in a minute. But before we do, Kristen, I want to ask you, and just to be clear for everybody, right? Because I think people get confused, command and control versus, a link, a download, upload link for data, right? Like video streaming. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the different things that Viasat can do for public safety? How would you bucketize those?
So I think it really depends on the vehicle, on the capabilities,
Sure.
and the sorts of sensors that are installed on the vehicle. So
Right.
You mentioned video. That's extremely important, I think, for most public safety applications. And so what Viasat would bring, either as a standalone solution or in a multi-link scenario where, we're just the backup if things go wrong with your terrestrial connection. So the user would just see, they wouldn't have to worry about the connection. They would see a consistent video or RF or infrared, whatever type of surveillance they're doing, whatever type of data that they're sending back and forth. They'll get that in real time. They'll see it, as soon as it is sent from the drone, as opposed to having to wait to download data later and do your processing and your analysis after the fact.
Right.
And you're right, it can get very confusing. So I think what we're aiming for, what everyone is aiming for, is just a very user-friendly kind of solution that you don't even have to think about it. Like just like your cell phone today, you pick it up and whatever it is you want to do, it works. And
hopefully. But okay,
of course.
So when I think about this, I'm thinking about like telemetry and this link to the aircraft in terms of navigation, command control, like the thing's not going to go off the rails or fly away because you're in control of it. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is just kind of data exchange, on the edge, depending on like what sensors you have, and then, being able to stream that, for example, to a command center. So I think those are the main things as I think about public safety that would be super important to them. But, let's talk about, Jerry, let's talk about beyond visual line of sight. We saw the notice of public rulemaking in the United States open and close in the, kind of that October timeframe. I think it opened in August, closed in October. And then we just saw a quick reopening, 14-day window to comment on electronic conspicuity and right-of-way rules.
Right.
Very interesting development just happened just a couple of weeks ago in February 2026. And I know drone responders has been very vocal about the rule. And so, with this proposal on the table, and hopefully it will come to fruition soon, we all hope and pray. What does this bring? How does that change the conversation for public safety in terms of beyond visual line of sight, particularly as it relates to what you guys offer at Viasat?
Yeah, so I guess let me put some context here, just a little bit more than kind of adding to what Kristen did, right? Is when we look at beyond visual line of sight, we look at what the regulator's looking for. What the regulator's looking for is different than necessarily what the flight operation is looking for. So when we look at C2 from a regular standpoint, they're looking at detect and avoid. They're looking at, call it electronic conspicuity, being able to understand what the aircraft is and be able to understand that in real time. And then be able to understand that whether the aircraft is highly automated or not automated, that there is some sort of management control function that is being done by the operator on the ground. And so we kind of put all of those things in the category of what we call C2. Those are critical for flight operations versus something where, their operations may be surveillance where video is important to them, right? And that's fine, except from a regulatory perspective, they don't care about what your actual mission is other than how does it relate to managing the aircraft. So when we talk about C2, whether, and C2 kind of wraps in things like, EC for electronic conspicuity, detect and avoid type aspects, management control or state of the aircraft and things like that. That's what we look at as the always on capability, right? And I know early on, we've had a lot of, we've been trying to get some of this point out to some of the aircraft operators and even the manufacturers. And hey, as you develop your software, be able to separate those elements from everything else, right? And don't get me wrong, for the operator, those things may be to them as important because it is their key mission. But from a regulatory perspective, that's not what they care about. What they care about are these things here to make sure that the aircraft are safe, that it's not going to cause public harm, whether
that's a great point. Yeah.
And so as we start to do that, this is where we say from an always on perspective, you generally don't need, the problem with L-band is right now it's low bandwidth compared to something like K-band broadband, right? We get that. But for the C2 parts, if you actually start to focus on just those elements, then what we've learned, and the operators are learning today themselves, is they can fit over these narrowband frequencies that we have for L-band, right? And it meets the regulators' requirements. And so that's what we bring to the table, is that kind of space-based solution that's not tied to any ground infrastructure, that allows them to create better flight plans, better flight operations for what they're doing, and focused on the C2 elements.
Got it. Okay. So like in terms of when this thing goes live, 108, it's like you need reliable C2, Viasat, check the box. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about some, you guys are global and so is this podcast. We've got a lot of people from all over the world that watch it. And Kristen, you track these regulations and, at least in North America, a little bit closer to home, Canada, Mexico, they're moving at different speeds in terms of beyond visual line of sight and their regulatory progress. In fact, just recently I was at GEO Week. It was very interesting because I sat in this a session on construction, and it was like two speakers from the United States and then this one guy from Mexico. And, everybody gets, yep, there's data. There's a lot of data. And then the big differences became in how they're applying that data and how the culturally perceiving that data. I'd love your perspective on what's happening in Canada and Mexico and how that kind of contrasts with the US right now.
Yeah. It's, to say it concisely, everything is different at the moment. not just in North America, but all over the world. We're seeing global politics has a place in this. Cultural differences absolutely has a place in this, in just the manner in which regulations are being written, the manner in which they're being applied, the speed at which they're rolling out. It's, eventually we're all, I believe, this is my opinion, the world will, come together or align a little bit better, but we're still early days. So, so with respect to North America, Canada actually has some rules coming into effect later this year, to open the door for some of the lower risk BVLOS operations. It's this different language slightly, but the same general approach as we've taken here in the States, which is, tackle the lowest risk, the easiest options first. Mexico at the moment is still playing it a little more carefully. They're still focused on rolling out visual line of sight operations and regulations. So, just everyone's kind of on a different speed track at the moment, which can complicate, public safety missions that typically go cross border.
Oh, absolutely. I've been going to these Government Business Executive Forum, or GBEF, EDGE events. And they always have Interpol there, and it's interesting because of the global learning. And I think drone responders represents this as well. I mean, Charles Werner, Chief Werner's crowd right now is in the tens of thousands, and his organization is global as well. So, they're all learning from each other. They're doing joint exercises, and I think that's really spectacular to have that kind of cross flow of information that's happening. But, we've been talking about drones, and the next wave, as we know, we call it advanced air mobility. A lot of people think about, quote unquote, air taxis. I think for many people in public safety, getting their brains around, well, how does AAM fit with what we do? I could see larger drones, very large, kind of carrying very heavy equipment, to Jerry's earlier point about carrying things, maybe evacuating people, things of this nature. Kristen, how do you see public safety emerging potentially as one of the first real AAM markets? And I'm not just talking about delivering, widgets to a team, but I'm talking more of like the big ones, right? The bigger aircraft, maybe even electric vertical takeoff and landing. Where do you see that fitting with public safety?
Yeah. I think there's a very real window, and I think we'll see more and more of these missions quicker, more on an accelerated time rate, as opposed to your, and I'm not bashing, air taxis, but more mission critical applications, let's say. We saw this recently, actually, in during hurricane season. So let's imagine your roadways get knocked out, your power is lost for thousands of people. It's difficult to get traditional airplanes in when you don't have a runway or an airport, for an eVTOL vehicle, one capable of carrying, temporary or emergency communications equipment, like a satellite dish, for example, or carrying supplies to just hop back and forth to these islands. That's a perfect example.
Kristen, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the Olympics and the horrific crash we saw, right, with Lindsey Vonn, and how they had to shut down the mountain for hours to get her off that mountain with a helicopter. And looking at that, it was just like, oh my gosh, hanging from the bottom of it like a mummy. You could see where any VTOL possibly could just actually potentially land, possibly. Pack the person up and go. Now, on that mountain and kind of putting divots in the snow on the course and all that. I get it. But wow, what another great potential. It's not even search and rescue. It's just rescue, if you will, just medevac, of a scenario like that. So, I think it'll take a while for those funds to flow to those public agencies. I know some of them struggle even today with starting up just simple drone programs and maintaining those. But once that starts happening, I'll give you a great example. I just got to brag on this guy. There's a guy named Mark Svensson, by the way. He's I met him in our clubhouse. We used to do Drone Law Connections clubhouse. So I met him virtually. Then I met him in human form, of course, at these local events in Colorado. He is search and rescue for Summit County. And I just recently saw him at Geo Week, and he came up to me and said, Dawn, we finally got money. And I'm talking now years, right? And he said, we have 8 people doing drones for Summit County Rescue now.
That's awesome.
And so I was like, yay, that is so amazing. Because when you think about, the avalanches and all of the things, not a lot of bodies of water here in Colorado, but the ones we have are deep. And then people go ice fishing and fall through, right? So just so many great applications and such a wonderful future, I think. Jerry, as you look ahead in your crystal ball, next 12 to 24 months for public safety teams, what do you see getting better for them?
Let's see my crystal ball. Let me look at it. I think that the biggest issue that hopefully will start to change is really a lot of lobbying that's been done right now is the ability to get regulation to normalize drone operations. And when I mean drone operations, I'm including advanced air mobility into this. I think there's both a cultural issue in addition to the regulatory issue, but I do see it hopefully over the next couple of years escalating a lot faster for some of the remote areas and things like that, and especially here in the U.S. I mean, if I look in the U.S., and you start to compare to other countries, we're definitely ahead in some areas, but we're also way behind in other areas as well, right? Especially if you look at the Middle East and other areas where they are embracing advanced air mobility and going full force with it, right? They're saying, okay, we've got areas where we can apply this. We're going to do this smartly, whether we start with cargo and then eventually go to, taxis. They're coming up with a rapid roadmap, but they can do that there because of their environment. For us, hopefully, we can start to catch up with that as well. Yeah, money. It's everything.
Money. I mean, let's call it right. I mean, they have the regulatory environment, obviously the interest, and then along with that interest, the funding. I think those are the 3 kind of big things. But to your point, Jerry. Not only the regulatory improvements, I think we'll expect to see these technology improvements, smaller swap size, weight, and power, and cost swap C, and all of these things. So, Kristen, as all these things start bubbling ahead, what would your advice be to public safety agency listening on how they can best explore beyond visual line of sight and satellite connectivity for their drone programs? In other words, what's the smartest way to begin?
Starting with a clear mission to make sure that you know what you want from a connectivity provider. Because, we'll be willing to work with any agency that's interested in doing business, but we're much better able to answer questions about our capabilities and what will and won't work in specific situations if you have a good idea of what you need.
I think that's so important. I can't reveal, but I had a client, I'll leave it vague, that wanted to do like everything with like a drone, and I'm just like, whoa, yeah, like crawl, walk, run, like pick one mission first, make sure that and by the way, not all platforms are built for all missions either. Like it's a very different mission to do a long range BVLOS ISR mission or search and rescue mission than it would be just to maybe statically monitor a parking lot, or a stadium parking lot, for example, for whatever purpose. So yeah, absolutely. Know your mission. That's a great first point. What else?
Yeah.
Number one, know your mission.
Oh, yeah. I'd say don't underestimate the importance of having someone on your team or someone that you trust that you can talk to who understands the aviation safety world. And
know your safety world. Okay.
Yeah. Because it can get very complex very quickly. So
yes.
I think just be willing to work with the pace of how these things are going to unfold. I mean, crawl, walk, run is how everybody is approaching this, and it can get frustrating even for us that things aren't moving faster. But the bottom line that nobody's ever going to cross is we're not going to introduce undue risk to anyone who's flying, and more importantly, anybody on the ground who's just going about their daily lives who doesn't want to worry about what's going on above their heads. So, patience. Be open to talk to aviation safety nerds who will go, like myself, who'll go on and on and on and on about regulations. And I think
that's awesome. I'm trying to encapsulate point number 3 here. It's almost like patience is a virtue, or like start slow and build momentum, kind of thing. The great words of wisdom there for not just public safety, but frankly, anyone starting a drone program, especially one with a complex type mission, where you are going to be going beyond visual line of sight and around critical infrastructure, people, in the airspace, sharing it with other people, all of it. So, wow, I knew our time would fly, and here we are. We're almost at our time together. I want to make sure people know like how they can learn more about Viasat, how they can reach you, and Kristen, for example, how to have conversations like the one you just mentioned. So let's start with you, Kristen. Any concluding thoughts, remarks on, to summarize, and then, how people can learn more.
Sure. I guess I would say to anyone listening who's maybe new to this space, I think to the layperson, when you talk about the future of drones and advanced air mobility, it can be quite daunting and scary. And, of course, there's going to be bad actors out there who use this technology for horrible reasons. But for every one of those people, there's, 10-fold, 20-fold, 40-fold number of people, of organizations who are using this technology, really doing amazing, fascinating things for the public good, for, betterment of their society, of the environment. So I would say, don't forget that. Don't forget that there's a lot of hardworking people out there who are using these for public safety, for good.
Absolutely. And how do they learn more? How can they reach you?
Yeah. Well, feel free to reach out to me directly. Otherwise, if you have the staffing, the resources, the standards development groups the door is always wide open to people who want to get involved in the regulatory process. And then, of course, if you want to just reach out generally, feel free to check out our website.
All right, very good. And that's a great point. I know, Jerry, you've also been involved in international standards bodies, and we didn't talk much. We talked about that quite a bit on the last show. By the way, Jerry is a friend of the show. He's been on before. So we'll drop that link, and you guys can go back and watch that one. But Jerry, kind of your concluding remarks, and what would you like to leave the audience with in terms of, especially that public safety crowd watching today, and also how they can reach you as well?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just kind of write a little bit on, supporting not only what Kristen said, but also, as people start to do this, kind of beating the horse here just a little bit, you definitely have to know your operations. You've got to quantify that in your roadmap is how you want to do that. More important, you don't need to know the sausage making, but you do need to be able to provide the ingredients required to deliver your solution. And we spend a lot of time with people trying to get them to just decipher what it is that they're doing. The more they can do that, the better story they can tell. It makes it a lot easier for the regulators. It makes it a lot easier for all the public to understand exactly what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how that's going to benefit them, and vice versa. So those are key elements of putting together any solution that they have. Yeah, I mean, it just really is as we do this, because, a lot of times we do spend a significant amount of our time on the front end just trying to decompose this as we work with different organizations. And doing that from a public safety perspective, again, you'll get that local support that you need to deploy your operations wherever it is that you want to go locally, in addition to your regulators. It makes it nicer just across the board. So yeah.
When you're talking about, Jerry, too, it just reminds me of military planning. You're talking about planning, basically, right? And
you've got a plan.
You got a plan. Whope is not a plan, and just taking something out of a box and throwing in the air is not a plan.
Full idea is not a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I worked for General Mattis at CENTCOM, he used to say, spend 2 months, formulating the problem statement. And it would probably take you about 2 hours to come up with your solution. Yeah. So putting that effort in on that front end, I think, is really key. Yeah. And it's awesome that you guys are available to help agencies walk through that planning process and their own thought process and their own needs to enable these missions. So that's awesome. So, Jerry, how can people reach you and learn more about kind of that cybersecurity aspect and other things that Viasat also brings to the table?
Sure. Go into our website. There's lots of links in there on how to get a hold of us. If you want to get a hold of us directly, I think we provided our emails that you can pop up on the links, and people can reach out directly to go from there. So we're pretty open to talk. We like in working with different people in the industry because we find it's a two-way street. It's not only them learning about us, but we learn about them, and it creates a better, broad community. And I think it's important to understand as people do this to manage your frustration as because I know I have no virtue of patience. So people like Kristen that have it, thank God. But as people are doing this, it's like, look, you have to equate this is you have a car that you're putting together and it's got 3 wheels and you're trying to put the 4th one on. That 4th one being, how do you actually get approval for regulations and everything else? So, regulations are defined, they're developing it in a community type way. That's actually a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because sometimes you're building it as it's being developed, and that's a high risk in the financial market space, right? It's kind of like, it's a high risk, it's a long risk. Are you able to do that and manage it as you start to go forward? So these are all things to consider.
Awesome. Viasat, the 4th wheel of the car. No, I think about you guys, you said, I think it was you, Jerry, maybe it was Kristen, I don't remember, but one of you said, we're always on, and that is, to me, as we conclude this show, and I thank you both. I thank you also, on behalf of everybody at the Dawn of Autonomy, to Viasat for sponsoring this very important month dedicated to public safety. This idea of, hey, we're always on, and when your mission's on, we're there. That's kind of how I think of it now. You've reframed it for me, so I think that's awesome. Everybody out there, thank you all so much for watching today. That is all she wrote. We are out here.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.